Hello and welcome to this workshop on New Horizons for Insect Farming and the role of research and innovation in strengthening cross-border collaboration, brought to you by the International Platform of Insects for Food and Feed, or IPIFF, as I will refer to it throughout this event. My name is Natasha Foote. I am a journalist with Euractiv and I have the pleasure of moderating today's event. So this year has been an exciting one in the world of insect farming with many regulatory developments. And so it was a timely moment to update IPIFF's brochure on building bridges between insect production chain, research and also policymakers, which we are going to hear all about today. So before we get stuck into the conference, I would just like to pass the floor to the IPIFF president, Adriana Casillas, for some welcoming words. So Adriana, the floor is yours.
Welcome to our speakers and participants and our colleagues. And I was saying that I'm pleased to welcome all of you to this IPIFF online workshop entitled New Horizons from Insect Farming, the role of research and innovation in strengthening cross-border collaboration. As you know, the past few years and events have shown us how the world that we live in is changing. Global crises such as the COVID pandemic, climate warming, and the most recent war in Ukraine have underlined the need of our food system to fastly adapt and find sustainable solutions. Addressing these global challenges requires the development and adoption of novel research and innovation approaches that will help making food system more sustainable, resilient, inclusive, and healthy, while at the same time contribute to the evidence base from strengthening their governance. We believe that science-based evidence is of utmost importance for the sustainable advancement of the insect production sector. So from its early phase, IPIFF has been proactively involved in the discussion around the development of the Horizon Europe program framework. To develop a joint position on the research priorities of our sector, we launched an international dialogue that led to the development of the brochure on research earlier in 2019. 3 years ago, the launch of this document, we will share an updated version with you today. Taking into account the regulatory developments that 2021 has brought, while also highlighting the recent evidence from scientific studies. All research is beneficial for the growth of such a young sector as ours. However, in order to face the current and future global challenges I mentioned it earlier, we need to channel our efforts into dedicated areas of research, depending, of course, on the regulatory framework. That is why today we have invited representatives from the European institutions and research bodies to present some reflections on how research in the insect farming field can contribute in the transformation of the European and global food systems, and how the priorities identified by IPIFF would fit in the wider picture of the EU's research and innovation agenda. Before concluding, I wish to personally thank all the speakers and panelists, our moderator, Natasha Foote, who will guide us during today's discussions, and each and every one of you for joining us today. I look forward to this interesting webinar, and I hope to continue our discussions in future IPIFF events, both online and in person, of course. So thank you very much and enjoy the webinar. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Adriana, for your introductory remarks. Second time lucky. Now let's get stuck into the conference itself. So we have a range of different speakers today, ranging from Commission representatives to scientists. There will be some presentations. You can see here the agenda in front of you. I won't go into all the details and spoil all the surprises to come, but there'll be different presentations. We'll also have a panel discussion and as well the presentation of the brochure that I was mentioning earlier. Now, this is an interactive event, meaning that we welcome and also encourage questions from you in the audience, which you can submit via Slido. Now, you should see on your screen there the instructions of how you join. So there's a QR code that you can scan, or you can also join via the hashtag IPIFF New Horizons that you can see on your screen there. And I just will ask you that please, when submitting your questions, do remember to say who the question is to, also to be concise, and don't be shy, do let us know who you are as well. So we'll now move to a quick icebreaker, which you should be able to see on your screen any moment. There it is. So here we go. In one word, in which areas can insect farming contribute to the European and global food systems? So I'm looking for one word from all of you. Off you go. Actually, we should see it come through on the screen. The areas that insect farming can contribute to the European and global food systems. First one, feed. Yes, a very solid word. Circularity, research. Feed is a popular one there. Circularity, yes. Efficiency, poultry health. Keep your words coming in. Sustainability there, clearly at the center. Many of you saying that. Food for malnutrition, circular economy. This idea of circularity, sustainability really coming through here. Avoiding emissions, again, in the sustainable line. Oh, there's all kinds of things coming through now. You can see them on your screen. Okay. So I'd now like to kick off the conference after that little icebreaker. Thank you for that. And I would like to welcome to the floor one of our keynote speakers today, Leonard Mizzi, who is head of unit of the Sustainable Agri-Food Systems and Fisheries at the Commission's DG of International Partnerships. Before I do pass the floor, I will just remind you again to please start submitting your questions via Slido, because there will be a short Q&A after Leonard's presentation. So without further ado, Leonard, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Natasha, and good afternoon from Brussels. I come from International Partnerships, which is the external relations of the Commission, one of the bigger departments. And after me, there will be Magda from our sister DG Research. One might ask, what does DG International Partnership have to do with insect farming, which is certainly a valid discussion. Our portfolio in international partnerships, basically, we are the interface of the Commission on global food security from sub-Saharan Africa to Asian Pacific and Latin America, but also relations with the Rome-based agencies. The two ones that we deal with are FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and IFAD, which is the International Fund for Agricultural Development, which is a financial institution. Clearly, and the President just said, we are in, I would say, difficult moments. Just after the COVID pandemic, we had the UN Food System Summit last year. We had the Nutrition for Growth as well in Tokyo in December 21. And in February, an aggression from Russia on Ukraine basically created more havoc in our already very fragile global food system, which was highlighted during 2021. I don't need to repeat what are the risks of all this, from food to fuel to fertilizers, and clearly the shockwaves that this is having primarily in Ukraine and in the eastern and southern neighborhood part, but clearly the ramifications that this is creating across the globe in terms of food price inflation. So why I was interested in this topic is primarily to see how what is certainly remains a niche sector in terms of the food system, how it can contribute to part of the solution in the medium to long term. Before coming to this meeting, I saw what is the research out there from an external relations point of view, from an external angle point of view. And clearly FAO, there is actually a study and the department which is part of the forestry unit, There was a lot of research since 15, 20 years ago already, but there hasn't been really a lot of updated research in the external relations field. I see a lot of participants, and I understand that many are from non-EU countries. So clearly, one of the issues that we are interested as international partnerships in our global food security portfolio, and we also deal with ag research for development. We support farmers' organizations. We support value chains. Why not also eventually a value chain like this one? Clearly, what we need from this group, this network, is evidence in terms of job creation. I just read, for example, the potential that the industry, this sector, can contribute to up to 8 billion in terms of turnover by 2030. What is the potential in terms, for example, of transitioning to more sustainable agri-food systems, with all clearly the assurances from a human health point of view and from the novel foods regulation? What could be also the transitioning in terms of nutrition, both animal nutrition, but also alternative proteins, so from human nutrition point of view? I see, for example, that there is a potential on biofertilizers, around 20 billion, which will feed pigs, goats, fish, and chickens. So again, what is the footprint that a transitioning from a high fuel approach in many of the countries in the developing world, what would this imply in terms of competitiveness, price, substitutability? These are the concrete issues, clearly from a research point of view, but also from a private sector and application point of view. Say between South Africa, Southern Africa, there are also clearly examples in the SADC countries, but also in Laos, in Central Africa, and other parts of the developing world. So this is one. Secondly, clearly the issue of acceptability from a nutrition point of view. How do you tackle this in terms of acceptability and communication in terms of nudging consumer behavior? Environmental impacts, socioeconomic, how also this could be part of the portfolio of diversification in terms of portfolio for smallholders. We know, and clearly the evidence showed in the COVID times, how this has created risks in terms of farmers' income. Could this be a game changer in terms of diversification of portfolio in a number of developing countries? Research and innovation and development will be tackled by Magdalena. My interest is also to identify what are the financing interests and financing appetite to the risk investment in insect farming. We have a portfolio known as Agrify and blending portfolio, but there are also guarantees which are part of the EFSD plus, and there is an agricultural and food systems window, besides a water window, which could also tackle some of the oceans issues. So the question is, what is the appetite of financial institutions, of European financial institutions, the EIBs, the FMOs, the KFWs, the CDPs of the European landscape in terms of de-risking and investing in insect farming to provide blended finance on small ticket sizes, because these are smallish ticket sizes, usually below 1 million in terms of portfolio. So that is something I think that an organization like yourselves can actually engage with financial institutions and see what is what I call the access to finance gap. Is there a pipeline? Where is the pipeline? And who is tackling the pipeline? I know that the World Bank unveiled a major study last year to show and to prove that there is potential in this area from a jobs point of view, from a diversifying portfolio point of view, from a nutrition point of view. This is a bit what is known as frontier agriculture, also as part of the climate change agenda. So my my question or my plea to all of you after this meeting is, how do you intend as a network, from a research private sector point of view, because I see a lot of private sector operators, how do you see this transitioning, but also the policy narrative from the COP processes, but also from the UN Food System Summit national pathways processes, which, as you know, many countries have their own national pathways. To what extent is this sector, insect farming, part of the transitioning and the acceptability policy-wise, but also from a trade point of view, to what extent are, for example, African countries and beyond positioning themselves from this sector in the UN Food System Summit follow-up. So I would conclude at that. I'm prepared to take some questions and see how we can help each other. But clearly, my plea to you is that clearly from an academic plus private sector plus policy point of view, I think this is an area where it requires more evidence on the ground, but also diffusing the evidence in close collaboration with UN agencies like IFAD, FAO, and clearly others. Over to you, Natasha.
Thank you very much, Leonard. So we now have around about 10 minutes for a short Q&A. And let me kick that off firstly with the first question for you, Leonard. So 2021 was a year full of developments for the insect sector, as I said in my opening remarks, talking from the point of view of legislation. In the context of the current global circumstances, in your view, what does the insect industry need to do more of in the short to medium term to do its part to secure food security?
I would say, first of all, more evidence and advocacy of how the insect farming sector can contribute, especially when we speak about broken food systems. I saw the report, fine, but then the question is, how do you convey this message to ministries of agriculture, ministries of finance in Africa? If you Google, which I did, insect farming in Africa or developing world, you don't have many hits. At least I didn't encounter many what I call recent hits. There was the World Bank study, a bit old studies, oldish studies in FAO. But for example, how does the sector, how is the dynamism of the sector feeding into the follow-up of the UN Food System Summit? Where? What are the gaps from research to legislation to acceptability from consumer, the feed and how the feed industry from aquatic aquaculture and animal, what are the benefits, cost benefits of all this? I think this has to be factored. To be honest, we have been discussing with FAO and IFAD, at least since I have been in the unit for the past 5 years. This never featured, not even one time in my discussions. So that's my issue. Is this a niche? Why is this not more visible? And sometimes in our jargon of the Commission these days, is this a nice to have or is this a must have? So how do you trigger that urgency or need? Clearly, will it remain a niche, or is there an issue of a gap in terms of acceptability, in terms of market potential, where, especially from a developing angle point of view, and something which is clearly important is we had the EU-Africa summit. How does this could feature as part of one of the value chains to look at? Because I think this is the most important thing. Is it a value chain which is worth pursuing between the EU side and the African Union with a number of African leaders and African business leaders in particular?
Yeah, you make some interesting points there, some interesting questions. Is it nice or is it a nice to have or must have? I thought that was interesting. Will it remain a niche? Also, you talked about consumer acceptance. And actually, we'll be talking a lot about consumer acceptance a little bit later on in this event, and also hopefully maybe answer some of the questions that you've just raised and throughout the webinar, but also with this brochure that I've been referring to. So I have another question here. So Leonard, given the technological progress and the regulatory reforms from the EU in the field of insect farming. How can both the European insect sector and also the European Commission contribute to accelerating technology transfer, and by that I mean collaboration with developing countries?
Look, there are loads of platforms. There is also a platform on research and innovation with African researchers and African policymakers. There is an EU-Africa platform within RTD, not much within DG INTPA. So again, is there a demand? And it's a question of triggering of demand. For example, we have lots of research on cotton. We have lots of research on cocoa research. But again, I never had a question on insect farming research. So again, is there a traction on two sides, and it takes two to tango, so that African farmers, African researchers, African policymakers knock at the door of European researchers and policymakers to actually put this higher on the agenda. Because there are lots of flagships in EU-AU side on research and innovation, but we didn't go ever into the granularity of insect farming. So again, it's not a question of research only, but it's the question of application of research to the market. If there is no market, research potential might be a bit stalled. So I'm very interested in the market potential and scalability of the market. Here I read 8 billion potential by 2030. Where will it be? Is it Asia-centric? Is it EU-centric? Is it US, EU, and Asia? What is the share of Africa? And is there a pipeline that financial institutions are ready to scale up and de-risk a sector? And that is linked also to acceptability, traceability, and clearly food safety issues. But this is something which goes beyond, I think, the remit of this particular aspect.
Thank you very much for that. We actually have a few questions that have come in from the audience via Slido. So let's see if we can get those up on the screen, and then you can answer those for us. So we should see a question here at the top from Daniel. Does the European Commission plan to invest more in agri-food youth entrepreneurship in non-EU European countries? That's what Daniel would like to know. What do you have to say to that, Leonard?
Yes, and I tell Daniel, if he looks at the outcome of the EU-Africa Summit, there are a number of initiatives which are focusing on youth, on civil society organizations, on women organizations. Our Commissioner Urpilainen, in her mission statement, is prioritizing a lot, for example, youth platforms, youth agribusiness platforms included, and that is the same question that I am saying in terms of de-risking youth, de-risking gender, and de-risking a sector like insect farming. So clearly, yes, the answer is youth entrepreneurship in general is being prioritized, and I can put you in touch with our sister unit on private sector, but also in all our dialogues and debates with FAO, with IFAD, in international fora, we always prioritize and are clearly giving signals about empowering youth, but empowering also gender in our portfolio. And we have indicators to prioritize more and more gender. So clearly, yes, because when you have 1 million youth joining the labor market every month in Africa, you can't not factor youth in part of that engagement. But not only youth just for the sake of youth, but giving them the right tools, because youth might not want to enter into agriculture if they don't see potential to engage in agriculture. So it's a question of making agri-food, agribusiness, private sector engagement in agriculture a viable and feasible operation for young people to actually engage in the sector.
Thank you for your thorough answer to that. You can see that there are a couple more on the screen that are quite popular. One here from George. There is already wide scientific evidence on the safety and potential of insect farming. What is missing to upscale it, e.g. recognition, funds, awareness? Perhaps you could answer that question for us.
Probably it's a blend of everything. I would say, how many of you have approached financial institutions to the risk insect farming in difficult, more fragile, more risky areas? I'm not speaking here about the Netherlands or Spain or Italy. I'm speaking about a country like Zimbabwe. Or has there ever been an approach to actually sound financial institutions, our EDFIs, European Development Financial Institutions, to the risk? So that is the question of funds. Are financial institutions aware of what we are discussing? Like, this is a topic which is pretty much specialized. And I can tell you, it's already difficult to engage into cocoa and coffee and cotton. If it becomes insect farming, there is clearly an information gap, which probably also financial institutions need to address. And clearly that brings me also to awareness about the potential, but also an awareness about how transformational this sector can be also in a post-COVID and hopefully post-war context once things settle down. Is this the right window of opportunity to increase awareness?
Excellent, thank you very much. We've got one last question here. It's an anonymous question. Are the EU delegations including such niche activities in their agri-agendas?
I can tell anonymous, no. Our delegations are so inundated with what I call core business. If I need to engage in value chains, my portfolio will encompass at least 10 to 15 value chains: cocoa, cotton, coffee, cashew nuts, now vegetable proteins, livestock, animal health. So yes, as an ingredient, but it's so granular, I don't have a problem that I can send a signal to our delegations in a targeted way where there is potential, where there is traction. But then again, it has to come demand-driven. Our portfolio is very much geographized, meaning activity is happening on the ground. But I can tell you, there is funds. There are lots of funds for de-risking and guarantees. The question is, will such funding land in the insect farming? And that is something which clearly requires the awareness, the dialogue with the financial institutions, and making a business case in the developing countries, especially in Africa.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your interesting insights and your reflections there. I would now like to turn to Magdalena Gajdzinska, who I have probably not pronounced correctly, for our next keynote speech. Now, Magdalena is a policy officer in food systems transformation at the Commission's DG responsible for research. And so she will be talking today about how EU-funded research can help address knowledge gaps, among other things. So Magdalena, the floor is yours.
Perfect. So good afternoon, everybody. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to this event and to give me the opportunity. Can we stay with the first one? Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to present the European Commission Research and Innovation point of view after Leonard Mizzi, that he presented the international aspect of it in the view of how important the issue of alternative proteins and dietary shift is. Next slide, please. First of all, I would like to the yellow one. I would like to provide a little bit of context about the EU policy that I will present a selection of existing projects on this subject, and then we will talk a little bit about what is keeping us busy those days, meaning Horizon Europe, as Adriana as well already mentioned during her opening speech. So let me start with explaining the EU policy context in brief and going through the Farm to Fork strategy. Next slide, please. So the EU Farm to Fork strategy is a key element of the Green Deal. It is the EU growth strategy to make the EU's economy sustainable and a top political priority, obviously. It aims at building a modern, resource-efficient economy and addresses the climate and environmental challenges. It makes as well full use of opportunities the transition creates for competitiveness, make the transition just and inclusive for all, and make Europe the first climate neutral continent by 2050. From the start, it was very clear To make the European Green Deal a success, we need to address comprehensively the challenges of sustainable food systems. Next slide, please. That is why the Farm to Fork strategy was launched in May 2020 as a key element of the European Green Deal. You can find the strategy on the link below the slide, and I will share as well it in the chat later on. The Farm to Fork strategy mentions 4 general goals, and these are to reduce the environmental and climate footprint of the EU food system, to strengthen its resilience and to ensure food security, and to lead the global transition towards competitive sustainability from farm to fork. Last but not least, to tap into new opportunities. It presents sustainability as a growth strategy. This is what our citizens increasingly demand. Nutritious food, which is healthy and is produced in a way which is respectful towards our planet. Next slide, please. In addition, it also proposes quantitative targets for 2030. 4 of the quantitative targets on the slide relate to food production and have been widely discussed. For chemical pesticides, the target is to reduce by 50% the overall use and risk of, and reduce use by 50% of more hazardous pesticides. Reduce nutrient losses by at least 50% while ensuring no deterioration of soil fertility. This will reduce use of fertilizer by at least 20%. To reduce sales of antimicrobials by farmed animals and in aquaculture by 50%. And to achieve at least 25% of EU's agricultural land under organic farming and a significant increase in organic aquaculture. Next slide, please. The objective of the Farm to Fork strategy call for transformation of food systems to make them more sustainable, healthier, and climate resilient. Also to provide business opportunities, as Leonard was mentioning, for all actors in the food systems, ranging from primary producers all the way to processors, retailers, food sector services operators, and consumers and citizens. The targets are very ambitious and cannot be just achieved overnight. So we will have to work on many enablers, and I would like to point out that one of the enablers is the research and innovation in driving the transition. This means that research and innovation will have to step up to show the farmers, processors, and consumers how things can be done. It means as well that research and innovation will have to build the evidence base, and it will have to deploy cross-cutting solutions that work not just from one, but from different perspectives. Next slide, please. So what about the alternative proteins and dietary shift? Well, these subjects are indeed mentioned in the Farm to Fork strategy. Alternative proteins, such as plant, microbial, or marine proteins, is one of the key areas of research for sustainable food systems and global food security. The aim is to stimulate food consumption that is sustainable in both health and environmental aspects, highlighting the importance of plant-based diets. The Farm to Fork strategy also states that the transition of sustainable food systems to sustainable food systems will not happen without a shift in people's diets. So alternative proteins therefore have a great potential to contribute to the dietary shift objective. Next slide, please. Now let us go briefly to the existing projects under Horizon 2020 on alternative proteins and dietary shift. Next slide. So in Horizon 2020, the EU has invested around 70 million in this area of alternative protein by supporting 15 projects, and the 4 projects below are funded from the last Horizon 2020 call on alternative proteins. And these are the next-gen proteins, working on the transformation of biomass into next-generation proteins for food and feed. Suzin chain that aims to contribute to novel protein provision for food and feed by overcoming the remaining barriers for increasing economic viability of the insect value chain and opening markets. ProFuture, shaping the future of microalgae protein, and Smart Protein that aims to develop alternative protein ingredients and products for humans which have a positive impact on bioeconomy, environment, biodiversity, nutrition, food security, and consumer trust. So you can find more details on their websites, and as well on the fact sheet that I will later on share in the chat. Next slide, please. And finally, what's going on with the Horizon Europe? Next slide. So Horizon Europe is the EU funding program for research and innovation with the budget of 95.5 billion. Horizon Europe tackles various subjects from climate change, sustainable development goals, and EU's competitiveness and growth. Its objective is to strengthen the impact of research and innovation in developing, supporting, and implementing EU policies while tackling global challenges. It is made of 3 pillars, and pillar 2 is the one that will interest us the most in the next couple of minutes. It includes 6 clusters. Although we are working on the cluster 6, food, bioeconomy, natural resources, agriculture, and environment, all clusters are linked. So, for example, cluster 1 is working on health. Also, it includes several elements that are relevant to our work as well on the alternative protein. Next slide, please. So, talking about cluster 6. Cluster 6 is made of what we call intervention areas, and we have the list on this slide. In my unit, we are responsible for intervention on food systems, and the work developed under this intervention is based on our Food 2030 initiative. Next slide, please. And the Food 2030 initiative is a concept referred to in the Farm to Fork strategy that I have already mentioned. The Food 2030 is a policy framework to future-proof our nutrition and food systems through research and innovation. It precedes the Farm to Fork strategy as it has started in 2016 and fed the research dimension to help develop the Farm to Fork strategy. We have identified a number of priorities that Food 2030 is keen to tackle, which are, the first of this is nutrition for sustainable and healthy diets. That's everything that relates to keeping people healthy. Food safety is also embedded in there. The second relates to transforming food systems so they become climate smart and environmentally sustainable through the whole system. By climate smart, we mean not just in terms of climate mitigation, but also in terms of climate adaptation. The third priority relates to circularity and resource efficiency throughout the whole food system. And the fourth is about the innovation to empower communities, and by communities we mean cities, towns, and rural areas as well. And to achieve those Food 2030 priorities, we need to apply system thinking throughout food drivers. The first is through research breakthroughs and bringing the transformation capacity of information and communication technologies, and also societal and humanities, especially with respect to consumer behavior and how we can nudge consumer behavior towards more healthy and sustainable choices. So the second is about innovation and investment. So all sorts of innovations are happening on the ground, and our role is to help those innovations to scale up and scale out. Thirdly, the open science, open data, and fostering a multi-actor approach and public engagement approach as well. And lastly, international collaboration, as was mentioned by Leonard as well. Next slide, please. So in October 2020, we published a report on 10 pathways for action, described in the document under this link in here in the slide as well. And I will again share it in the chat after my presentation. So the pathways will guide you through future call developments that you can see represented on this tree in dark green color. The future call developments are represented in dark green, and part of it is a dietary shift in proteins on the top. The outer layer lists the relevant part of Horizon Europe. The inner layer is the Food 2030 priorities that we have just discussed before. The entire tree is driven by EU policies as nutrients, and the sun, the European Green Deal, is allowing the photosynthesis. So the pathways for action represent key levers of change where RNI can have a deep and multiple impact in realizing the food system's vision. So each pathway sets out the systemic challenges, expected co-benefits, barriers to enablers of change, and highlights potential RNI areas meriting further consideration and investment. So I really highly recommend you to have a look at these pathways, and especially the pathway of dietary shifted proteins, which again I will share in the slide in the chat shortly after the presentation. Next slide, please. So that's how the pathway for alternative protein dietary shift looks like. And the publication points out, next slide, please. So the publication points out as well the research and innovation needs, like to improve, develop new alternative protein food products, to assess environmental footprints, performance of alternative proteins foods, to assess positive and negative impacts on human health and the bioavailability of alternative versus conventional sources of and dietary shifts, and to make better use of food environments, which links food supply and diets for the diversification of the protein offer, with the aim to help achieve environmental sustainability and health objectives, as well as to identify all drivers and barriers of dietary choices and provide additional knowledge and recommendations to policymakers and other food systems actors on how a dietary shift can be enabled. Next slide, please. So thank you so much. This is what I would like to say on the subject of the research and innovation from our RTD perspective. Again, thank you so much for the invitation and see you on the plenary discussion. Thank you.
Many thanks, Magdalena. I particularly enjoyed the tree visualization that you had. It was very nice. Now, if you have any questions for Magdalena, as she said, she will be in the panel session later on, so we can address them there. So no worries, if you have any burning questions, they will all be answered later on in the event. I would now like to welcome to the floor Rui Nunes, who is the IPIFF Executive Committee Member in charge of research activities for the brochure, for a short presentation on the updates to the IPIFF brochure that I mentioned earlier on. And we will have time for a short Q&A after the presentation, so do be sure to submit your questions via Slido. So Rui, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon to all. Well, we need to understand what we are discussing, and this document it have not been created today. Have been created in 2019, and it was part of a public consultation on the orientation towards the first strategic plan for Horizon Europe. So this document is a revisitation and trying to renew a document that have been made 3 years ago. Well, the key priorities maintain the same and are these three, and we would like with that to contribute to upscaling the insect production while also opening new markets. Those was the objectives in the past and maintain the same at the present. So we are discussing about exploring the use of new substrates as feed for insects, and for another side, the reuse of byproducts produced in the insect industry, like the frass, and for the other side, exploring the nutritional and health benefits for the insects for food and for feed. Well, 3 years after, a lot of things have changed. One of them is the launching of the farm to fork strategy made 1 year after the publication of the first document. The context has changed, and a lot of things have been made in the wild. For novel food authorizations have been made, approval of insect processed animal proteins for poultry and pig have been gained, and the first standards have been created in the European Union for insect frass. Well, to gain all of that, we had count to a lot of studies. 80% of studies about insects and on insects were published in the last 5 years. So a lot of science is behind all of these publications and all of these things that we have won. But let's see, how was we in 2019? Well, we were thinking and saying that we were producing 90 million tons of food waste, and we were increasing the demand of fertilizing products in agriculture. We also were talking about this duality between animal-human health nexus. So, and now, how are we? We are not talking at the moment on 90 million tons, but 50% higher number of 130 million tons of food waste that we are producing now. We have now other great problems like a pandemics, like COVID-19 and a war in Ukraine. War in Ukraine is a war where in the country that is the most or one of the most important producers of cereals and fertilizers for Europe. So it is a big problem to go through. Well, the first objective was exploring the use of new substrates for feed for insects. You can go to the web page of IPIFF, and you have there all the document newly publicated. So it is now free for all. Well, I was saying for the first topic, at the moment when we see an overview of what is being used as substrates for insect production inside the IPIFF members, we see that 76% use agri-food industries co-products, and 10%, near 10%, use farmer foodstuff. But in it, we may have the attention that this farmer foodstuff does not contain fish or meat products, cannot contain fish or meat products. So these farmer foodstuff with fish or meat products are being downcycled at the moment. Well, but when we talk with the IPIFF members, they say that 1/3 of the food waste generated could be suitable for insect production activities, including those kind of substrates that are now being downcycled, like farmer foodstuff with fish or meat. But in a conclusion, if we want to adapt and to help the strategy of farm to fork, we need to cut on half the waste produced in 2030. So probably we should invest on more research on the use of those kind of products that at the moment cannot be used in the insect industry. The second section of the brochure is the reuse of the insect byproducts, and the insect frass is one of the examples. Well, I will start to highlight the recent market turbulences in the area of fertilizers. A clear indication that we need to accelerate the deployment of alternatives to mineral fertilizers, especially when we see what is happening in Ukraine. So the help we have here is that we had a new regulation that entered in force in November of the last year, and that have made the first definition of the frass across the European Union. So we have at the moment, I think for the first time, one harmonized definition that can be used to produce in one side of one country and to be sold in other country without any problem, because it's harmonized across European Union. For other side, the goal of farm to fork of using 25% of organic agriculture could be helped by the use of our frass, because the frass can be used to inorganic producers to produce in organic way. Well, in conclusion, we can contribute to our self-sufficiency with the frass, and for other side, with the frass, we can contribute to these 25% of agricultural land being in production in 2013. At last, but not the least, this part of the exploring of nutritional health benefits using insects for food and for feed. It was a fantastic year, 2021, because we had the approval of 4 new products, 4 new insects that are now approved to be safe, to be consumed, and have been approved by EFSA. So are a lot more to be approved. You can see on IPIFF website and accompany what is happening about the other insects that are to be approved at the moment. But we think in the next years we will have the approval for more insects to be used as the source of nutrients to human food. But insects are not only proteins, are ingredients that have a lot more to give to our nutrition than only proteins, and they have micronutrients that are important to the human health. As an example, we also have interesting preliminary evidences that this research could offer us to interesting insight with interesting insights like this one. The overall health of humans can be reduced the risk with the use of insects as nutrients to human food. But talking about feed, because insects could be food, but could be also feed. 2021, last year, in September, have given us a new regulation that allows us to use insect proteins in feed for pigs and poultry. And I think this was a great step that have been done by us. But as I was saying, in human food, we are not only talking about proteins when we talk about using insects as feed. There are a lot more of agents than proteins and fats, and the future research could investigate the correlation between the incorporation of different insect-derived ingredients and the health benefits that we have on the target species. So, in conclusion, we have the possibility to address different angles of the One Health approach with these topics that we have chosen to invest in our research priorities for the next years. Thank you for your attention. If you have additional questions, we can talk about it or address the Q&A session.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rui. I do have a few additional questions, just a couple for you. So my first question for you is, looking at the IPIFF brochure, you took into consideration only 3 priorities or subjects. And there are a few maybe different topics, maybe that research, maybe they were missing or could have been done with regards to insect farming. Maybe you could comment on that.
Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Sorry, so in the brochure that there was you took into consideration only 3 priorities and subjects. Don't you think there were many other subjects that could have been researched? There are
a lot of many other questions that could be addressed, but we need to prioritize. So we have considered the objectives here that were going on the way of the upcycle of the sector and open of new markets for the sector. So those was our preoccupations when we start to prioritize and to define 3. There are a lot of more. You are right.
Thank you. And another question for you. So do you think in another 3 to 5 years the priorities in this brochure will change? Maybe there needs to be an update or an evolution over the next few years.
Well, we have made an update. Have passed 3 years that we had the first construction of this text. We have changed, but we have not changed the priorities. I don't have a crystal ball at the moment to understand what will happen in the world. So if the priorities will maintain or we will need to change it. At the moment, 3 years have passed and they were maintained because it makes sense to maintain them. The future will tell us how to proceed.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your presentation and for answering those questions, Rui. We're now going to take a short coffee break, but don't go too far away because we'll be back in 10 minutes with the next half of today's event. So go grab yourself a cup of coffee and I'll see you back here in 10 minutes time. So hello and welcome back to the second half of this IPIFF event. I hope you're all back and refreshed and raring and ready to go. So as a quick reminder, we will have a few presentations coming up as well as a panel discussion, which will be followed by a Q&A. So please do keep your questions coming in over Slido and do make sure to say who your question is addressed to so that I can put it to the correct speaker. So let's get stuck into the second half of the event, joining us for which are Ignacio Perez Dominguez. So he's a senior scientist and team leader at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission in Sevilla. We'll also hear from Giovanni Colombo, who is a Senior Public Affairs Manager at EIT Foods headquarters, and Pernille Videbaek, PhD and researcher at Aarhus University in Denmark, working with EIT Food on the Trust Tracker project on edible insects, among other things. We'll also welcome back a few familiar faces from earlier on in the event. So each of our speakers will be invited to give a short presentation, and then we will have a panel discussion where you can have all your burning questions answered by the panelists. So first, I would like to turn to Ignacio for your presentation. The floor is yours.
Hi, Natasha. Thanks a lot for the presentation. Hello, everybody. Nice to be here. Just maybe confirm that you see my presentation. I think it's okay.
Yes, that's perfect. Right. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. I'll be brief, following the tight timing that we have allocated. Just to say a few words about me, I work at the JRC, at the European Commission. So I'm a colleague of Magdalena in the research area of the Commission. What I'm going to present here is a few things about work we've done on insect-based feeds here in Sevilla, at the JRC, at the Joint Research Center. So maybe just to start, to say that one of our main lines of work is what we call the medium-term agricultural outlook. So we produce market projections for EU markets, for EU agricultural markets, typically 10 years ahead. This is something we publish with DG Agriculture. We do this every year, and it's very much linked to other what we call outlook publications that are led by institutions like the OECD or the FAO. A few words with respect to what I'm talking about here. Feed markets are expected to stagnate a little bit, even decrease in the medium term. We've heard a bit about the farm to fork strategy, about dietary shifts. Also some tensions recently on the conflict between Ukraine and Russia are also affecting feed markets. Especially cereal and high protein meal usage is expected to decline, as you can see in the graph. But prices are expected to rise in the longer term, and I have not included here yet the strong increase in food inflation that has occurred in the last few months. So this is a publication that we did in December last year, and we are now starting to work on the next one. What have we done to model the insect-based feed sector or a glance at what this could mean for agricultural markets in our model, in our analysis? We have started with trying to estimate the food waste by commodity in the next 10 years. And here you can see a graph where I show the potential food waste for the EU and for the world. So I think, so thanks a lot. I think I have a very nice bilateral connection with IPIFF, and I like very much the work that they're doing. What you can see here is that in the EU you have a large proportion of fruits and veg going to waste, and there's a little bit of a different proportion than the rest of the world, but we're talking here about 2,000 million tons of food waste for the world, and about 120, 130 for the EU. What do we have in here? We have food waste from the production side, from the processing side, distribution and consumption. We have included roots and tubers, fruits and veg, pulses, eggs, meat, fish, sugar, cereals, and dairy products. Pretty much every product, not all of them, but the most important ones. What have we done with this estimate? We have carried out an analysis in a model that we call Agrincosimo. That is the model we use for the outlook, where we have included these food and waste estimations, and then we have used this or part of this food waste to feed a kind of virtual insect meals and oils sector in the system. What is this sector providing? It's providing feed, so insect-based meals most prominently, but also some oil that is brought into the biofuel sector. When we are doing this, how do we do this? We carried out some scenarios, and these scenarios differ with respect to the availability of food waste. Obviously, scenario one, if you see in the slide, would be like 100% of the food waste in the world goes to the insect sector. Also, it's maybe not so reasonable, but it's kind of a far-fetched scenario just to have a look at what is the maximum potential. But we differ. We segregate these scenarios with respect to food waste use, but also which sectors can demand this insect-based meal produced on food waste. While producing on food waste, we assume that there is no additional costs for the system. Okay, so this is why we did not affect our cost functions in the model. In the scenario one, we feed all the livestock sectors. So in this case, we did not contemplate completely the regulatory situation, and we have two papers on this that I can also provide to you if you're interested in more details. The scenario two is a bit more realistic scenario where only 50% of this food waste goes to the insect-based meal sectors, and then all the livestock sectors are introduced. In the third one, we have a much more moderate proportion, and only aquaculture species are fed. Why is aquaculture so important here? Well, aquaculture has, many of you already know, has increased a lot. So the production of fish from aquaculture has already surpassed captures. This means that there's an increasing need for feed in this sector. Some of these feed come from the agricultural sector. So the link between the agriculture, the farming, the crop production and animal on the demand side sectors and the fish sectors is more and more important because of aquaculture. Moreover, we have here what we call, or some of my colleagues, my co-authors in these papers call the fish trap. We have a lack of fish meal, which is the high protein, high quality meal that is fed to the aquaculture fish, and this needs to be replaced. We're talking about high price meals, and therefore we think that this is a really good niche for insect-based feed, and probably the industry already knows that. So this is something we have contemplated in our analysis. Just to show here the potential demand for insect-based meal, considering these amounts, both for the EU and for the world. This is research. This is of course not validated with the industry and so on, but I think it can maybe provide some insights about the importance of this sector. Let me stress as well that producing this insect-based meals from food waste is an additional supply to the system, which also affects prices of other meals like soybean-based meals or rapeseed-based meals. So it has some important knock-on effects on the agricultural sector. Thanks a lot for your attention, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you very much for that, Ignacio. Now let me bring in Giovanni Colombo, who, as a reminder, is a Senior Public Affairs Manager at EIT Foods headquarters, followed by Pernille Nordgaard Videbaek, PhD and researcher at Aarhus University in Denmark. So Giovanni, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Natasha, and hello, everyone. I hope that you can see me and hear me well. So first of all, I would like to thank IPIFF for the invitation to join this seminar. I'm just here to briefly introduce EIT Food and then give the floor to Pernille. I'm happy to join this seminar, not just because this is an important topic, but also because many members of IPIFF are also partnering with EIT Food currently, or have been partnering with us in the past. Companies such as Essento, Better Origin, Nasecomo, that is one of the scale-ups that we are supporting at the moment, and others. So it's great to be here. I would like to touch upon two important points. So first of all, about EIT Food, we are a partnership of industries, universities, research centers, and startups working together on agri-food innovation. We are funded by Horizon Europe. And among our innovation focus areas, we have one which is dedicated to protein diversification, and it is within these focus areas that we also tackle innovation in the field of insect. And protein diversification is for us an important part of our strategy, where we see a lot of opportunities, but we also see many significant challenges. And one of the areas where we are also eager to develop a stronger understanding is for sure the one about consumer acceptance. And this is also another important point that I would like to share with you, is that for EIT Food, the role of consumers remain central in the transformation of the food system. So we attach a lot of importance to consumer centricity. And this is why since 2018, we have been conducting a study to analyze the trust of consumer in food across Europe. And every year we publish the result of the study in the so-called trust report. And this trust report is based on data also coming from the Trust Tracker, which is a peer-reviewed, evidence-based methodology to survey consumer trust that we have developed together with academic partners, which include the University of Aarhus, and this is why we are happy to introduce Pernille today, but also University of Reading, European Food Information Council, KU Leuven, and the University of Warsaw. And the role of these studies for us help us to better understand the perception the consumer have and share this feedback with our partners to make sure that we factor consumer needs and expectations into our innovation work. So these are just a few points that I wanted to share, and now I would like to give the floor to Pernille, that will tell us a bit more about her work in the field of consumer analysis and behavior. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about my research and for being part of this day. It's been very interesting to hear all the other presentations and angles and perspectives on this topic. And what I hope to give to you today is some perspectives on consumer acceptance of edible insects. And the reason I'm talking to you about this, as was already explained, is that I'm a postdoc, I'm a researcher at the MAP Center in Denmark. And this center is really focused on researching value creation in the food sector for consumers and the industry and society. And I work mostly with consumer behavior and how to get consumers to accept these very novel food products. And as was also mentioned, I'm also part of the EIT project that tracks consumer trust in the food sector across time. So that's why I'm talking to you today. And what I really want to go through is just a very short theoretical background to give you an idea of where I'm coming from and the field I'm in. But then dive into some of the research done on this topic before I shortly present some of my own findings, and then wrap up with some talking points on where we go from here, and hopefully give you some food for thought towards the end. So it's going to be in major headlines, but I'm hoping you can follow along on this in this presentation. So I'm in the field of marketing, and a lot of consumer behavior that we look at, we follow this theory or this idea, which is basically just the idea that there's a link between your attitude and your intention, and also to your intention to your actual behavior. So what this model or theory basically states is that if you have a positive attitude towards something, you're also more likely to have a higher intention to do this. And if you have a high intention, then you would also be more likely to actually perform the behavior. So everything really starts with having a positive attitude towards something. And in this case, it could be eating insects, for instance. And if you start out with a positive attitude, then it's also more likely that you end up doing it. So that's the basic step towards this consumer acceptance. And that's where I'm coming from in this field. So the research done has so far looked into this intention to eat, or this willingness to eat. And a lot of the studies already done has looked at a lot of the factors influencing this intention to eat for the consumers. And these factors can be grouped into different groups, you can say. So we have factors that are about the consumer characteristics. So what traits are they inherent in them? It's also more like socio-demographic factors. So who are they? Are they older consumers, younger consumers, men or women? And also a group of factors that are more related to the product itself, so the insect product, which could be the degree of processing, for instance. So all of these factors influence how likely the consumer are to be willing to eat insects. And for instance, with the consumer-specific traits, it could be food neophobia, which is a measure of how open you are to trying new foods. And if you're scoring very high on the food neophobia, if you're a very neophobic person, then you're not very open to trying new foods. And then you will also be less likely to be willing to eat insects. This is what some of the previous research have found. With regards to socio-demographic factors, it's most often found that men are more likely to want to eat insects than women, and also that it's more the younger consumers who want to engage with novel food products. And for the product-specific factors, this degree of processing is one of the factors highly studied. So the more processed the insect, the more likely consumers are to be willing to eat it. So if it's insect flour, for instance, then consumers are more positive towards it than if it's a whole insect, for instance. So my own research on this topic took point of departure in all of this, and we really looked at because a lot of the previous research had focused on the more negative aspects, so this food neophobia, for instance, and all the barriers to consumption, we also wanted to focus on the more positive aspects that we also could see that consumers had, because consumers were also very interested in the topic, and we could see in the media that it was very widely covered as well in very positive terms. So we really wanted to see if this attitude that hopefully should lead to consumer acceptance, if that didn't consist of both a positive part and a negative part. And the reason, again, we're so interested in this attitude is because it is the first step towards changing consumer behavior. So we found in a consumer study, we did 3 segments of consumers. So we found some who were very, very opposed to eating insects. They really disliked the idea of this, and they were the least interested, but at least positive towards using them as feed. And these consumers tended to be older. Then we also found a segment that we called insect feeders, because they were most positive towards using insects just as feed for other farm animals, but they weren't really interested in eating them themselves. And these consumers tended to be female and hadn't really had a chance to try insects before. And then we had what we called the potential entomophagists, so the potential insect eaters. And these consumers were positive towards insects as food for us consumers, but they weren't that positive towards using them as feed. And these consumers tended to be younger males that had tried to eat insects before. And so we would assume in our study that the consumers on either side of this spectrum, so the insect opponents would be having a very high negative attitude, part of the attitude, but a very low positive one. And on the other side, we had the potential entomophagists who would be very positive, but not very negative. And the consumers in the middle would then have a bit of both. So they would both be positive and also negative. So they would maybe be more ambivalent towards eating insects. But what we actually found was that all of these 3 segments were actually very ambivalent when it came to eating insects, and that the consumers we classified as potential entomophagists were actually the most ambivalent. So even though they're very positive, they also still have this negative part of their attitude that are interfering and kind of deliberating with them internally. So the key takeaway from that study was that we have these 3 segments of consumers with differing levels of readiness to eat insects, but they all have this attitude ambivalence. So even though some consumers are very positive towards edible insects, they are also still very hesitant. And then I also want to point out this food versus feed issue, because for some consumers, if you advertise insects as feed, then they don't see it as a food for us consumers, and vice versa. So that could be an issue that needs to be researched further for the consumers. I've also done other yet to be published studies on this, where we looked closer into this emotional response, and we tried to shift it into a more positive direction, where we tried to change this attitude basically. And we did succeed somewhat in affecting, you could say, the positive part, but not the negative part. So again, this ambivalence for the consumers could be an issue. So where do we go from here? There are a few points that I would like to leave you with. And one of them is this, again, food versus feed trade-off there is. Because, as I said, some consumers do think it's fine to use them as feed, but if you are interested in eating them yourself, then this might be an issue that you see them as something you feed to other farm animals as opposed to something you would put on your own plate. So I think there's a communication issue with consumers as to which insects are used for what, basically. Then you also have the trade-off between whole insects and insects as ingredients, because consumers are more acceptant of insects used as ingredients. So the less you can see them, the more positive consumers are. But if they don't have the experience with eating whole insects, then we don't really get to learn all of the good things that insects can give us food-wise, and we just hide them under what we normally would eat. So you might lose some perspectives in that. And also, this also gives a distance to the things that we eat. So you become very detached from what you're actually eating if it's just hidden as an ingredient in something. And I think maybe a potential for insects could be to get consumers to question the food choices that they make if we want to move into a more sustainable diet overall. And there are so many good arguments for why to eat edible insects. And I think it's really important to emphasize all of them for consumers, because the sustainability aspect is already something consumers are aware of, and also the fact that insects are very healthy. And potentially also this animal welfare. It's not something I know too much about, but having talked to a few people in the industry saying that perhaps this could also be an argument for why we should do this more with insects. And I think because consumers are so ambivalent, it's also easier to have these arguments and really argue for why they should choose this product in the end. So this was a very, very brief and hopefully not too information dense presentation, but you're always welcome to get in touch if something was unclear or if you have further questions. But, thank you.
Thank you very much, Pernille, and also to Giovanni for your very interesting insights there. I would now like to hear a quick 1-minute reaction to what we have heard in these presentations from each of our panelists. But before I do, let me just remind you all to keep your questions coming in, because we will soon be starting a Q&A with all 5 of our panelists. So do keep those questions coming. So let me turn to Rui first. Let me invite you back to the floor, Rui. Rui, what are your impressions about what we have heard so far here? You have 1 minute.
So starting with the end, this theme of feed versus food, I think it's very important to understand how the consumer will sense, and how can we communicate better with the consumer. This is important for us and for the industry to know how to address better our consumer. So we should talk about it, I think, in the future. Farm to Fork from Magdalena, it was fantastic, and is one more something that we already know. We want to be in the Farm to Fork with the insects and make the presence in the Farm to Fork, and we need to know how to do it better. This was my vision of the presentation of Magdalena. And for other side, from the part of Mizzi, from Leonard, it was fantastic to hear about Africa, but I need to know how to get there, how to arrive, how can I help, because I didn't understand what can we hear from Europe change to get there and to help something, to help to do something better. And I think we need to think a bit more about it.
Thank you, Rui, for your reflections there. Let me now turn to Magdalena for a quick 1-minute reaction to what we've heard so far today.
Thanks so much. So all of the presentations were super insightful, really towards the topic we are discussing about right now here: alternative proteins, dietary shift, consumer acceptance. Especially, actually, Pernille, the consumer acceptance was really insightful for me when she was highlighting the consumer acceptance in general. And it just makes me think that the consumers might be still unsure about whether alternative proteins are safe and healthy, and they have the trust issues and how they can be regulated, etc. So they expect the product to be tasty, visually appealing, have clear labels, and be affordable to all. So there is a lot of demand in there. So shifting demand will be unavoidably a challenge for some of the businesses, which need to be supported by the transition to the new business opportunities and jobs as well, like Mizzi mentioned. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I also share your thoughts there. I thought it was a very interesting presentation. Ignacio, let me come to you now for your quick 1-minute reflection.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I actually like very much the presentation by Magdalena, and actually she raised she was presenting the initiative, the Farm to Fork initiative, and mentioned those targets that are very ambitious targets that have to be now picked up by the member state strategic plans. just to maybe say in a few words the conundrum that we have in here with the need to reduce, or the willingness to reduce meat consumption from a dietary perspective in some ways, which will affect, of course, feed. On the other side, we have strong problems on the supply side with Ukraine not being able to deliver enough feed to Europe. So there are, maybe just to say that there are strong market disruptions on both sides, from the demand and from the supply side, and that it's very typical that we are asked to do ad hoc analysis every few months, because things change very, very rapidly. Maybe one word for thought about prices. As an economist and market analyst, we need to regard prices as the guys that make the equation correct. So depending on how these prices develop, one or the other sector might be better off. And it's very important when considering the potential expansion of an alternative sector like this one, to consider what are the costs, and what are the prices, and what are the break-evens for it, and just not to contemplate it in isolation, but also together with all the other traditional sectors, so to say. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Ignacio. Giovanni, let me turn to you now for your reflections.
I would say that maybe my final comment is about upscaling and accelerating solutions, because I think that more and more what we see that there are new ideas or new products and new innovations that are coming to life, that are being developed, but more and more we see that the problem is about how do we kind of upscale them so that they become mainstream and we can deliver the impact that we are hoping to deliver, also from an environmental and sustainability point of view. So I think that we need to work harder on identifying also the barriers that are kind of slowing down the uptake and acceleration of the solutions, not only from a technological point of view, but also from a societal and policy and regulatory point of view. So I think as EIT Food is very interesting in having this conversation with all the stakeholders and partners to see how we can move forward faster and more effectively.
Thank you very much. And last but certainly not least, let me turn to Pernille for your 1 minute reflections.
Thank you. What really stood out for me today is I normally just sit in my own lane with this consumer approach, but it's so rewarding to hear all the other aspects and all the other parts of this process. And if we somehow have to get consumers to adopt edible insects and really embed this in the market, then it's really rewarding to hear all the other aspects, and this really sparks a lot of new insights and ideas for me at least. So thank you very much.
Excellent, thank you very much. I'll now kick off the Q&A session with all of the panelists we have here. Let me turn to Rui first for a question I have here for you. So the question is, can insects as feed contribute to reducing the use of antibiotics in the context of antibiotic resistance?
We think so. There are studies pointing in that way. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I can hear you. We can hear you. Yes.
Well, I was saying that there are studies done at the moment. They're pointing that way. But I think we need more evidence to say something like that. I think we go right, we go in that way, but we need more evidence.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try and put a question to Magdalena. I know she's having a few connection issues, but Magdalena, the question is about Horizon Europe 2021. Are the projects selected already? Are you able to share some information about this? Fingers crossed you're able to speak.
Yes, thanks so much. So I actually saw a second question about that in the slide as well, from now I lost it. From Daniel as well, I think. Yes, he was asking about cluster 6 precisely. So Yes, I actually on purpose didn't mention Horizon Europe projects yet during my presentation because so first of all, the deadlines for applying, they have passed for Horizon Europe 21, Horizon Europe 22 as well. Horizon Europe 21, the deadline was 6th of October 21, and for Horizon Europe 22, 23rd February this year. But now we are working on the Horizon Europe 23, 24 projects as well. But anyways, in the participants portal, you can find the information of the alternative protein calls that were launched during the Horizon Europe calls, and that will be when they are published as well, that they will be launched. And I would share in the chat again the link to the participants portal where all of this information about possible calls is mentioned, but the chat is not working apparently. So maybe I will just present you very briefly one slide on how does it look like on the website. I think I can do it. Let's see if my computer handles it. So if you go to participant portal, if you just Google funding and territorial opportunities, you can put alternative proteins and you will have the different projects that are already closed or that in the future that they will be open as well for possible funding. So in this way, you can find what interests you in there, and you can use different keywords as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Magdalena. Very thorough. That's perfect. Thank you. Let me turn to Ignacio. Ignacio, taking into account the 2021 regulatory developments for the insect sector, as I said, there's been a number of different developments. Would you have developed a different hypothesis for the model published in the EU Outlook report from 2020? Would you consider maybe working on other scenarios in the future on food, feed, or FRAS?
Thanks a lot, Natasha. Well, first thing, we did not consider the FRAS, and I think this is an interesting avenue for reutilizing material for fertilizing, for organic fertilizing. And we have not, and it's something we might want to have a look at. Regarding regulatory, I think we were already quite lax in the sense that we already kind of discounted that regulatory change, specifically on PAPs, because otherwise the scenario was very complicated. So if you look at the scenarios 1 and 2, we kind of discount part of these regulatory changes that have taken place, or part of them have taken place, and then scenario 3 is only on aquaculture. It was more kind of traditional. I was looking at a question in the Slido, if I might have a minute, Natasha. I can show some results on the scenario 3 on the production impacts and price impacts of a scenario 3. So as you can see, this increasing volumes of fish meal produced from food waste could bring down fish meal prices by 20.3% down, and oil does not change so much because this interacts with the biofuel projects, and production is a little bit less. So if you want, I can send you the link to this paper, and you can have a more thorough look at market impacts. Thanks a lot.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the offer. Let me put a question now to Pernille. There's a number of questions here for you, actually. The first question I'll ask you is, when conducting a study, how important is the phrasing of the sentences and the questions for the consumers? Are you able to give some examples about this, maybe expand a little bit on this point?
Yes, it's very important how it's phrased. The way we normally measure this, both the attitude and also the intention, is we use these 7-point Likert scales. So you would say how likely is it that you would buy this product in the future, for instance, if you talk about the intention for buying a certain product. And then in that regard, it's also the more concrete, the better. So it's better to ask about how likely are you to buy this specific product that we have developed that is on the market or about to be on the market, than just to ask about insects in general, because that becomes too abstract for everyone, really, also for ourselves if we had to answer that. So it's really about making it as concrete as you possibly can. So if you have a product in mind that you want to test, then really describe that and ask the consumer about that specifically.
Interesting. So making it kind of more specific, more targeted. Okay, very interesting. Thank you. Giovanni, I have a question for you in terms of people's reaction when you're talking about this diversification, whether people speak about the health and environmental benefits of edible insects, whether they kind of instinctively ask about this, or whether you kind of inform them about this when you're speaking with them.
So you're asking what are people's reaction to that?
Specifically on the health environmental benefits, you know, how interested you find people are in this aspect?
Well, so what we see is that people tend to confirm that they want to eat foods that is more sustainable, but they often don't know whether the food they're eating, whether it is actually sustainable. So there is definitely an information gap. And that's why there is right now a lot of discussion about environmental food labeling and what could be the solutions to fill this gap and give consumers reassurance that what we're eating is actually less harmful for the environment or the climate. I cannot hear you.
Oh, so no, sorry.
Okay.
Have you? Yeah, continue.
So, I mean, this is something that we are supporting definitely because I think we stand in favor of greater transparency and better consumer information. And we believe that bringing more information to the consumer will, even when this information is sometimes not totally kind of clear in the kind of the guidance and what it actually means, I think that consumers tend to better cope with the complexity when they are made aware of what are the potential dilemmas and trade-off, rather than trying to push to them something which is you know, or too maybe too white or too nice, and you know, try to convince them that they should just believe in it and trust it as it is.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. I'm now going to turn to the Slido. We've got a number of questions coming in. Let's have a little look what's going on here. So we have a question here for Rui first. So IPIFF wants to investigate and work on post-consumer substrate to rear insects, CSF, for feed purposes, or is it out of the agenda? Rui, perhaps you can answer that question for us.
No, it's not out of the agenda. This investigation is being done, but the most part of the investigation is not done by IPIFF by themselves or by ourselves. It's done by the companies that is being the base of IPIFF. So we need to have our partners to make this kind of investigations.
Okay, thank you very much. A question here for Ignacio. Oh, hello, where's it gone? Well, it is necessary to maximize the contribution of insect farming to reducing the food waste burden. What is necessary for this? Science, legislation, other things? How can we maximize this contribution? Ignacio.
Thanks for the question. I think the science is there. I mean, the very high-tech industry is showing that. Legislation is moving in that direction. So I think some of the elements are already there. What is needed? I think it needs some commitment. Also, maybe more explicit mentioning in the legislation. I mean, the goals of reducing food waste as such, without any specific incentive or any specific policy measures do not work. I mean, food waste is part of the demand. If I throw a yogurt because it turns off, it goes off in my fridge, I wanted to buy that yogurt, and I will probably continue buying that yogurt. I mean, this is not something you change so easily. But providing a market for that food waste, that's an interesting thing, because then you are actually creating a new demand. So I think it's important to recognize the value of this food waste.
Thank you. Absolutely, food waste is a huge issue. I have a question for Magdalena. I'm very much hoping that she's still with us and able to answer this question. The question is, to build on the existing scientific evidence, should the EU invest more in, for example, living labs? This is something that Leonard, Mizzi mentioned. more awareness and recognition is needed. So Magdalena, perhaps you could comment on that. Fingers crossed you're able to answer that one.
Oh, actually, I didn't understand the question, George, fully, to be true. Maybe you can rephrase it again in the question. But so what we are doing in the living labs, there are specific, it's not really alternative protein related, but in the soil missions under Horizon Europe, there is explicit mention to the living labs as one of the ways to achieve the mission objectives. So in that moment, you can, in there, the living lab is really explicitly mentioned, though maybe we can, maybe you can repose the question or you just drop me an email and we discuss. Thanks.
Great. So George, if you have further questions, Magdalena very kindly has offered to answer that for you bilaterally. So do feel free to get in touch. A last question here for Pernille. So from Jose. So Jose would like to know whether you could please kindly advise what was the sample population on the survey about edible behavior. Pernille, are you able to give us a few more details about that?
Yes, this was a representative sample of Danish consumers, and it was 975 Danish consumers we sampled for that study.
Excellent, very concise last answer there for us. Thank you very much, Pernille. And thank you to all of our participants today, our speakers, and also for all of you watching. So that brings today's event to a close. Thank you all very much for tuning in. From my side, I found it a very interesting and very rich discussion about this topic. Throws up many questions and definitely something to watch in the coming years. So to be sure to check out the IPIFF website, where you are able to find the updated brochure and read it for yourself, peruse at your leisure. Any questions that were not answered on the Slido will be answered in the coming weeks, so no fear, no worries, they will be answered. And that brings everything to a close. So I'm Natasha Foote. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great afternoon and a great weekend. Thank you. Goodbye.